Ready?
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your the Facebook stream links so we can also populate that as we begin?
Yeah, I think I put it in here. Let me just Facebook. Let me go direct.
Okay, I'm just gonna copy this link here quickly.
Amina, I think your video is not coming.
Okay, I have just added the link on our WhatsApp group, so everyone should be able to disseminate that in their own networks. I'm also adding that on our GPUB page, so that should be good. Let's see here. Okay. Where's that coming from?
Yeah.
Sorry. All right. So whenever we are ready, just let me know. We will start. I'm ready.
Yeah, let's start. I think people are coming, right? Let's start. It's almost 8:04.
Okay. All right. Well, it's August 19, 2020. Good morning, everyone on the East Coast. A super early morning to folks on the West Coast, and a very good evening to our friends in India. We welcome you to this press conference titled Indian Americans Stand in Solidarity with Prashant Bhushan, decrying the contempt charges against him. We hope that you're also doing well amidst difficult times caused by COVID-19. We extend our prayers for your well-being and safety to yourself and your friends and families. This is Dr. Manish Madan, and I welcome you on behalf of the Indian American diaspora, represented by collective voices of all faiths, beliefs, and ideology that are committed to reclaiming India back to its foundational values that once solemnly resolved to constitute India into a socialist, secular, democratic republic with securing to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity as it began the journey of independent India nearly 3/4 of a century ago. It is ironic that while we all celebrated India's Independence Day not too long ago, here we are talking about what that freedom really means in today's independent India. Are we free from hunger? Are we free from poverty? Are we free from lack of literacy? Are we free from lack of access to proper healthcare to millions? Are we free from superstitions? Are we free from corruption? Are we free from violence against women? Are we free from mob lynching? Are we free from hate, polarization, and killing in the name of religion? Are we free from the compromising nature of institutions, our values, and perhaps reducing this conversation to a more simplistic question, are we free from speaking truth to the power in the 74th year of independent India? Do we have freedom to exercise our basic fundamental right, the right to free speech in India today? Do we? To answer that specific question, we have put together today's press conference and this esteemed panelist. As the voice of Indian American diaspora, we thank Hindus for Human Rights, Global Indian Progressive Alliance, Young India, Student Against Hindutva Ideology, Voices Against Fascism in India, and Indian American Muslim Council, and Dr. Ambedkar International Center, and many other sister organizations for coming together in expressing their solidarity for eminent lawyer and activist Prashant Bhushan and registering our voices against the contempt charges as it likely jeopardizes the constitutional guarantees. We also have eminent members from the civil society on this call, our fierce senior advocate Indira Jaisingji and our beloved Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi as our special guest, and we are extremely grateful for them being the torch bearers for the lesser mortals and guiding us through these difficult and challenging times for the Indian democracy. To initiate the proceedings of the day, I would like to state a few pointers for this event. On behalf of the Indian Americans, this press conference is not an affront to the Supreme Court of India and to our learned judges. This event is instead geared to express our grounded views, express our solidarity, and practice our fundamental rights to the free speech, guaranteed by both the American Constitution and the Indian Constitution, two unique places that we all recognize as our Karam Bhumi and Janam Bhumi. This press conference is being recorded on Zoom and is also being live streamed on the social media pages of all the organizations that we mentioned earlier. The event will begin with keynote and special remarks, which will be followed by brief statements read out by each organization lead member. At that time, we will transition into outlining a call for action, namely International Day for Solidarity with fasting for Prashant Bhushan and a prayer for Supreme Court. Last but the most important component for which we are extremely grateful to our friends from the media present today on this call, we will invite Q&A from as many members from the press as possible and other members of the civil society on this call. We ask you to identify your name at the time, the outlet that you represent with your question. So our Q&A moderator, Ms. Sunita Vishwanath from Hindutva Human Rights, can pose those questions to the panelists. We have timed this conference to last 75 minutes, but we'll appreciate your courtesy if we were to extend it to a buffer of additional 15 minutes, depending on how it goes. At this point, I will invite Padma Shri Indira Jaisingh ji to the floor to give her keynote remarks. She has dedicated her life to the working on the causes of human rights, gender rights, and worked tirelessly for the underprivileged sections of Indian society. Over to you, Ms. Jaisingh, at this point, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. We're gathered here today for a variety of reasons, but the foremost reason is to protect a value considered universal and not subject to arbitrary state borders of any nation, which requires us to collectively defend it. What is this universal value? It is our right to express ourselves. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Our right, it is our right to express ourselves. The pandemic in our midst has brought, just give me a minute. Yes, the pandemic in our midst has brought human life to a halt. This period has been known as an andropause. While our species may survive the andropause and come out stronger, if there was a cessation of the right to express ourselves, we would revert to a less than human existence. Imagine a life without expression. I cannot. It would be akin to being unable to breathe. I speak my mind, therefore I am. But if that right to speak comes with a threat of prosecution, it is no right at all. The pre-independence judgment of the Supreme Court of India compromised this right by stifling fair comment, quote unquote, on the functioning of the court. In a deliberative democracy, all institutions need to function in a transparent way to gain legitimacy. When we critique the court, we do so with the intention of bringing it back to its core function, the dispensing of justice by the rule of law. We do not critique the court to name and shame it, but to retrieve its core values. A court which assumes the power to entertain public interest litigation must open itself up to public voices on its functioning or its absence of functioning without threatening us with contempt of court. The second most fundamental right is the right to personal liberty granted by Article 21. No person can be punished, and therefore our liberty cannot be taken away except by procedure established by law. This has to be a just, fair, and reasonable procedure. To be punished for a crime without a charge being framed against you is neither fair nor just nor reasonable procedure. Such a procedure cannot be countenanced by any court. The third is the attack on the right to legal representation itself. An attack on lawyers, in the ultimate analysis, is an attack on the right to legal representation guaranteed in all civilized societies. Modern liberal democracies cannot function without an independent judiciary, and an independent judiciary needs to be transparent. It needs constant course correction by deliberative discussion with its main stakeholders. Lawyers are one of the key stakeholders of the administration of justice. We have a duty to speak when we believe that the court is deviating from its core function. It was in America that the first major doctrine of separation of powers was articulated when the Supreme Court of the US in Marbury versus Madison outlined the defining role of the Supreme Court in seeing if law conforms to the Constitution. Without a judicial branch to interpret the laws, a constitution is meaningless, which is perhaps why we in the legal profession hold the judiciary in the highest regard, and that is also why courts must maintain the respect of the public. Which brings me to the subject we are gathered here to discuss, the question whether in a democratic society it is an offense, the offense of criminal contempt can survive at all. Should it exist at all? Recent events have caused us to gather today and pause to consider this question. When our courts are given such an important role, does it not consequently follow that as citizens we have the right, if not a duty, to be vibrant in our criticism of how they function? To me, this goes beyond my profession. It goes to the very heart of my being, for the conviction that we are here to discuss has shaken the very foundations of free speech in India. Courts are required to defend the right to free speech. But when the courts themselves cut this right down, then it is time to pause and think, what has happened? Why has this come about? Why are we not being permitted to speak freely, truth to power, as Dr. Manish said? I'm here to defend my own rights, not somebody else's right. I speak because I must. Over the years, I have spoken for accountability of the judges. Why? Because the Supreme Court of India belongs to you and me. Its core function of dispensation of justice belongs to you and me. And it has to be accountable to the public at large. This can only be done by the exercise of right of speech in the dispensation of justice. And this has to be accountable to the public at large. This can only be done by the exercise of speech without the threat of contempt. Remember, we, the marginalized, and those who represent the marginalized, have no other weapon in our armory. We cannot bribe our judges. We cannot bribe the executive. We don't have arms. All we have, our only weapon is our right to speak up. And speak we must. In a manner of speaking, judges too are part of the state and hence open to criticism. They perform a vital public function. The Indian Supreme Court's public interest jurisdiction is public after all, and every judgment they deliver, which is in their public interest jurisdiction, affects you and me. This gives us the locus to make bona fide a constructive criticism of the court. How can we be stopped? To stop us would be to stop deliberative democracy, reverse the march of history from democracy to autocracy. Surely we must resist this. We understand that courts are our allies and not our enemies, and that they are the last resort and the hope of victims of undeserved want. By the way, this expression, victims of undeserved want, is taken from the Constitution of India. Mark the word undeserved want. There is nowhere else to go for them to protect themselves against executive injustice and denial of basic entitlements. That is the historic role of the courts and their reason to exist. Let us understand clearly. Our fight has to be against the executive, which wields executive power in the name of us all, and not against the judiciary. No individuals can scandalize the court. Only state power can scandalize courts. Behind every act of deviance of a public functionary is the guarantee of impunity from legal consequences and perhaps the promise of rewards. Civil society can offer no rewards. The power of judicial review is resented by those in power till today. Our role is to defend the power of judicial review. This is the only way we can do it, through free speech. So I would like to conclude by saying what exactly is wrong with the judgment. Summing up, the court says that it is an interference with justice. Which comment interfered with justice? We are not told. 2. Prashant has been convicted for having committed a crime without the framing of a charge. Has not Article 21 of the Constitution, which protects the right to life and liberty, been violated here? He pleaded that he made fair comment of the functioning of the system. Why was this question not addressed by leading evidence or in any other way engaging with him? The judgment fails to address the question of fair criticism in accordance with well-known principles of law. And third, we are told that public confidence in the courts would be shaken by the comment. Was the public even consulted on this issue? Or do the 3 judges of the court constitute the public? There is a clear conflict between what the judiciary perceives as its own independence and the independence of the bar and the public to make fair comment on the conflict, on the functioning of the judiciary. And this conflict needs to be resolved. The court has not enhanced its dignity in public consciousness by convicting him for contempt. It uses a sledgehammer to kill, if I may say so, with an iron hand, a cheatie. That iron hand needs to be shown to those who control the levers of power, not to you and me, not to civil society. This, of course, does not mean that we, civil society, are powerless. We carry the power of public opinion, ultimately the only game changer. Fortunately, the number of editorials against the judgment and the number of statements issued against the judgment indicate that public opinion favors free speech, the right to criticize the functioning of the court, not a particular judge or a particular judgment, but the institution as a whole. Accountability of institutions is not negotiable. It must be addressed by institutional arrangements. The fact is, the pure stream of justice cannot be allowed to be polluted at its fountain. Let's deal with it on another day, but we really need to know how our judges get appointed and why X and not Y. No one can deny that matters of life and liberty are pending, while non-essential cases against Prashant Bhushan was fast-tracked in a court that was not open to all. I wish to make a point over here. Criminal justice must be dispensed in open court, not behind closed doors. And addressing the issue by video conferences is addressing behind closed doors. We do not want to revert to the days of the Star Chamber when justice was not seen in broad daylight. As Justice Lodha has spoken on the subject, he asked the heavens would not have fallen if the case had been delayed until a proper reopening and public hearings began. Court proceedings are not live streamed, and hence we didn't know what happened in court that day. And I appeal through this press conference to the Supreme Court of India to reconsider the judgment in a full court of all 32 judges. Is this the collegial view of the Supreme Court? We would like to know. Allow interveners to address the court so that we, the people of India, and perhaps the peoples of the world, can tell you what is our view of the functioning of the court. We cannot be gagged. Thank you for giving me this opportunity of saying a few words to you. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, Indra Jaisingji. Those really passionate remarks. We appreciate those, and hopefully they will influence some of the members in looking at what free speech really means and how we all should stand up for our value systems. Next, I will turn over the microphone to our beloved Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi, who dons many hats. He's the author of more than a dozen books, a historian, and a biographer involved in efforts for trust building and resilience and reconciliation. He currently serves as a research professor at the College of Education, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, Chicago. At this point, over to you, Dr. Gandhi, and welcome aboard. And thank you for giving your time to us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope that I'm being seen and heard. It's a great honor to speak after Indira Jaisingh ji. Like some other nations, today's India faces troubling currents. One troubling current is ethno-nationalism, the notion that a particular population group owns a country. The other troubling current is an anti-democratic push against individual rights. Standing firmly against both currents in India is the remarkable senior advocate, Prashant Bhushan. For decades, Prashant Bhushan has placed his wonderful talents at the service of the human rights of the weak and the downtrodden, including the right to live, the right to think, and the right to speak. Prashant Bhushan has exposed big corruption in high places. He's fearless. He takes up a just cause, even if it's unpopular. India is fortunate to possess a person of his integrity and his gifts. India's Supreme Court receives thousands of cases every year. This year, citing the pandemic or other considerations, the court has not heard most cases, whether about the suspension of democratic rights in Kashmir, or the deaths of protesters at the hands of the police, or laws that involve citizenship rights, or other matters of obvious urgency. But it applied itself to Prashant Bhushan's comments on some of the Supreme Court's judgments and on a photograph of the Chief Justice on a motorbike. And the court concluded that Prashant Bhushan should be jailed or fined for contempt of court. When future scholars look back at our times, they will be puzzled by the priorities of the Supreme Court of India. Tomorrow, the court is to deliberate on the punishment it wishes to give to Bhushan. More than Bhushan, it is the court that is on trial. Prashant Bhushan's standing as a defender of the rights of the Indian people has grown decade by decade, year by year. The future will see him as one of the great Indians of our time. My anxiety is about the standing of the Supreme Court of India. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gandhi, for again those compassionate remarks about Prashant Bhushan. We all are on the same page. I just want to make sure my audio is clear. I think I'm hearing that I'm going in and out. So if I do, please do give me a heads up so I can see something here at my end. Next, I would like to actually ask our moderator or backend support, Fawad, can we play the video for that we have for Prashant Bhushan? Right. This is a brief video, so thank you very much. We can't hear the audio, so do you have to? Fawad, we are not able to hear the audio.
संस्था, चाहे वो न्यायपालिका ही हो, जो कर रही है वो ठीक है कि नहीं है, अपना काम ठीक से कर रही है कि नहीं कर रही, उसमें क्या। हमारा स्वतंत्रता दिवस है और इसलिए हमको ये सोचने की ज़रूरत है कि जब हमारा देश स्वतंत्र हुआ और उसके बाद एक गणतंत्र बना और हमने एक अपने आप को एक संविधान दिया, तो हमारे क्या सपने थे और हमारे संविधान के क्या मूल आधार थे। ये कि हर नागरिक के कुछ मौलिक अधिकार होंगे, जिसमें एक बहुत अहम अधिकार है कि अपनी राय रखने की आज़ादी, अपनी बात बोलने की आज़ादी, अभिव्यक्ति की आज़ादी, बहुत ही एक अहम हमारा मौलिक अधिकार है। उसके अलावा लेकिन इसमें बहुत अहम जो एक आज़ादी दी गई है वो अपनी अभिव्यक्ति की, अपनी राय रखने की आज़ादी, क्योंकि किसी भी लोकतंत्र में ये बहुत ज़रूरी है कि लोग अपनी राय रख सकें कि भाई जो हो रहा है, सरकार जो कर रही है वो सही है कि नहीं है। कोई और इंस्टीट्यूशन, कोई और संस्था, चाहे वो न्यायपालिका ही हो, जो कर रही है वो ठीक है कि नहीं है, अपना काम ठीक से कर रही है कि नहीं कर रही, उसमें क्या सुधार होने की ज़रूरत है, ये सब आज़ादी रखने की ये मौलिक अधिकार इसलिए दिया गया। सबसे अहम चीज़ ये करी गई कि इस पूरे संविधान की रक्षा करने के लिए और लोगों के मौलिक अधिकारों की रक्षा करने के लिए एक स्वतंत्र न्यायपालिका का गठन किया गया, जिसमें कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट, हाई कोर्ट्स और उसके नीचे के कोर्ट्स बनाए गए, जिससे कि जिनका काम सिर्फ यही नहीं है कि न्याय दें नागरिकों को, लेकिन उनका एक अहम काम ये है कि लोगों के मौलिक अधिकारों की रक्षा करे। अगर कोई सरकार मौलिक अधिकारों को वायलेट कर रही है तो उनको रोका जाए, उनको अपना काम करने के लिए आदेश दिया जाए, जो काम, क्योंकि हर एक जो पावर दी जाती है उसके साथ एक ड्यूटी भी होती है कि जब आपको वो पावर एक्सरसाइज करने की ज़रूरत है तो आप करें। जैसे रूल ऑफ लॉ मेंटेन करने के लिए पुलिस को अधिकार दिए गए हैं, और इसका मतलब ये है कि रूल ऑफ लॉ मेंटेन करने के लिए उनको उस अधिकार का यूज़ करना है। जो ऑफेंसेस हो रहे हैं, जो अपराध हो रहे हैं, उनको रोकने की उनको पावर दी है। इसका ये मतलब है कि रोकने के लिए जो करने की ज़रूरत है, FIR रजिस्टर करना, ये सब उनको करना पड़ेगा। अब तो एक दूसरा खतरा आ गया है कि पिछले 4-5 महीने से, जब से ये कोविड की प्रॉब्लम हुई है, तब से हम ये देख रहे हैं कि लॉकडाउन ही चले जा रहा है इस देश में। चाहे उसका कोई औचित्य ना रह गया हो, लेकिन उस लॉकडाउन को इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है कि कोई डेमोक्रेटिक एक्टिविटी, कोई प्रोटेस्ट मीटिंग वगैरह ना हो पाए। धारा 144 लगातार इम्पोज करी गई है और सरकार की गाइडलाइंस ये हैं कि कोई पॉलिटिकल एक्टिविटी नहीं हो सकती। तो न्यायपालिका को करीब करीब बंद रखा गया है। सिर्फ वीडियो से कुछ केसेस की सुनवाई होती है, वो भी सेटिस्फैक्ट्री नहीं होती, बहुत कम केसेस की हो पाती है उसके थ्रू। इस बीच में पार्लियामेंट भी नहीं काम कर रही और बहुत सारे ऐसे संशोधन कानून के, लेबर लॉज में, एनवायरनमेंट के लॉज में ऑर्डिनेंस के थ्रू करे जा रहे हैं, जिससे कि सारे लेबर प्रोटेक्शन के जो कानून थे उनको खत्म किया जा रहा है, एनवायरनमेंट के प्रोटेक्शन के कानूनों को खत्म किया जा रहा है। तो इसलिए आज अगर हम देखें और ये पूछें कि भाई हमारा लोकतंत्र कितना आज कायम है, तो करीब करीब 0 के बराबर।
Manish, I think you're muted.
Yes. So thank you very much for sharing that brief video, so people are getting an idea why we have assembled. Moving on to the agenda, at this point we will transition to inviting our individual group leads.
Manish, your audio is not so good.
Okay, I will repeat myself. I was saying that we will be transitioning at this point to our speakers from individual group leads. The first I have on my list is Student Against Hindutva Ideology, represented by Vishwa and Lakshmi. So over to you, Vishwa and Lakshmi. The floor is yours.
Great.
Please introduce yourself and give your statement.
Great, thank you so much. We're from SAHE, a progressive student coalition equipping the South Asian diaspora in the pro-democracy struggle against Hindutva. Our statement is as follows. We are heartbroken. We are heartbroken by the tragic irony that on the eve of the Indian Independence Day, the Supreme Court of India silenced the dissenting voice of Mr. Prashant Bhushan. Mr. Bhushan raised tough and important questions about the Chief Justice of India and about a judiciary system with which his values and ours have often been at odds. It's important to note that while the judiciary might be independent, it does not mean that its judges are free from scrutiny. The Supreme Court chose Mr. Bhushan's case over hundreds of others, including habeas corpus cases in Kashmir and Hindutva mob violence in Delhi. That they viewed his questions as worthy of urgent action so undermines the legitimacy of democracy and the independence of the judiciary. It undermines the private citizens and activists who may not hold the power or office of the Supreme Court, but certainly have the right under law to carry their opinions about the state of their own country, to voice them, and to strive for change. To SAHE, the implications of this decision do not fall on deaf ears. To be clear, this action is an omen that sets dangerous precedent for the conviction of students and activists and creates a chilling effect that will haunt India's promise of free speech. We stand in solidarity with the students, the organizers, and the legal community of India who are fighting for the right to peacefully dissent, which we believe is so critical to a democratic and flourishing India. My colleague Lakshmi will conclude our statement.
Thank you, Vishwa. As SAHE, an organization with many aspiring changemakers, lawyers, and organizers of the South Asian diaspora, we are joining a broad coalition of organizations across the world, mobilizing for change in the US and India, and are committed to standing shoulder to shoulder with Mr. Bhushan. SAHE is currently working against democratic backsliding in India and for justice for oppressed South Asians, both on the continent and elsewhere. Our initiatives, made possible by decades of South Asian American organizing before us, have made rounds through college campuses around the country and encouraged young members of the diaspora to challenge Hindutva in all its forms. As students currently witnessing and experiencing fascism around us, we understand the decision to silence independence thought to be deeply disturbing and a reflection of broader patterns of suppressing dissent. We ask the Indian judicial system to reconsider its regressive and dangerous conviction and conduct, and we ask the Indian diaspora to stand with us in supporting Mr. Bhushan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishwa and Lakshmi. Thank you very much, Vishwa and Lakshmi, for your statement. Next I have on our schedule is Srishti Agarwal, representing Voices Against Fascism in India. Over to you, Srishti.
Thank you, Manish. Well, I'm here to represent Voices Against Fascism in India, a political organizing and advocacy group that has been created to address the challenges of an increasingly fascist, xenophobic, and authoritarian government in India. As our other coalition partners here today will and already have discussed the pertinent issues concerning the legality of the judgment, judicial reform, and the need to uphold the right to free speech, our collective would like to complement their arguments by drawing your attention to what Mr. Bhushan so rightly pointed out in his tweets. While the right to free speech is paramount and should not be challenged by any authority in a free country, discussing the judgment alone would serve the purpose of deflection and remove focus from the uncomfortable reality of India, where the judiciary appears to be highly corrupt and at the same time repels any calls for transparency. The judiciary, instead of addressing Mr. Bhushan's arguments, have adopted a colonial weapon to act like masters and wield powers to squash any criticism. Mr. Bhushan is the foremost authority on the farcical nature of the contempt of court clause, and to try him for contempt is conveying that the judiciary now rests above the very citizenry that they are meant to protect. The judiciary has effectively said that no reform or allegation to its oligarchic existence is now welcome. So, we wish to make the judiciary accountable, by amplifying the questions that Mr. Bhushan and others have rightly asked. Do the citizens not have a right to question the judiciary and its judges? How are we to believe that the judiciary is independent when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court becomes a member of parliament after his term? Why does the government decide the post-retirement jobs of the judges? If the judiciary itself is not independent, how can we trust the independence of other institutions like CCC, CPI, CAG, etc.? And how can the judiciary be investigated independently? Why has the judiciary remained quiet on the curtailing of freedom of expression in the country through threats of violence? Why does it not force the government to maintain the law and order for citizens to exercise their basic rights? Why does the judiciary refuse to recognize the political persecution that exists in the country today? Has the judiciary been reduced to a puppet of the ruling party? Does a legitimate democracy still exist in this country? Like Mr. Bhushan, we should never be afraid of questioning the challenges to the Indian democracy, its laws, its institutions, and the judiciary if it starts to play a role in deconstructing the very fabric of the nation. The need of the hour is to put the judiciary itself on trial and to ensure that it doesn't only answer to the interests of a few, but to the interests of the 1.3 billion people that it is meant to protect. To repeat Mr. Prashant Bhushan, जगह है कितनी जेल में तेरे देख लिए हैं देखेंगे जय हिंद
Steve from Voices Against Racism in India. Next we have on our list is a member from IAMC, Miss Amina, a young, one of the youngest activists here. Over to you, Amina.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amna Ahmed, and I'm an activist and youth leader of the Indian American Muslim Council. Firstly, I'd like to say that we stand in solidarity with Mr. Prashant Bhushan. We're seeing a complete miscarriage of justice with the Supreme Court holding Mr. Prashant Bhushan guilty of contempt for tweets against the judiciary, which is simply absurd, taking into account that his tweets do not say anything out of the ordinary other than what can and should rightfully be permitted to express by the citizens of any country that claims to be a democracy. It is just shocking, right, to see how a 280-character tweet is all it takes to supposedly destroy Indian democracy. If we take into consideration the actions of the Supreme Court. The court says, and I quote in regards to his tweet, that it damages confidence in our judicial system and demoralizes judges of the highest court by making malicious attacks. The court's pronouncement also says that Bhushan's, quote, tweet has the effect of de-establishing the very foundation of this important pillar of the Indian democracy, end quote. Yes, right, of course, a tweet by one man can remove all confidence in a judicial system. And is India's democracy really, really so frail? There's a basic right to freedoms that India's constitution guarantees in Article 19. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression is one of the 6 freedoms guaranteed, freedoms which are completely not being taken into consideration by the Supreme Court. Justice is allowed to sustain the criticism of ordinary men. An outspoken critique cannot be labeled as contempt of court like we are seeing with this case, and quite frankly, many other cases as well. Truly free speech in India is increasingly becoming less and less free. And the question arises, is this freedom secured by the Constitution supposedly forbidden in practice? With the worrying rise of students as well as activists charged with sedation, we see an effort to stigmatize them and create a narrative where any form of dissent is marked as anti-national. This notion that one cannot call out and question a higher authority surely has deep implications for where India is headed in terms of guaranteeing the rights that it claims to secure, is headed as a so-called democratic nation as well. There's no room for silence when we look at the troubled direction India is headed in. We will continue to resist this injustice and raise our voices until justice is served. I call on you all to continue to speak up as well and educate others on the situation of Mr. Prashant Bhushan, as well as speak up on the injustices, the mob lynchings, the rapes, the building of detention center, the stripping of citizenship, and all other crimes being committed against India's most vulnerable. We must continue to stand in solidarity. We must continue to amplify, and we must continue to resist. And with that, I'll end on a verse from the Holy Quran promoting social justice. It says, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And let there always be among you a body of men who should invite to goodness and enjoin virtue and forbid evil, and it is they who shall prosper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amina. That was very moving. I'm so proud of you. You know, the young faces, when you see them speak up, it just makes my heart at least filled with joy. So thank you very much. Next, we have on the schedule is Rajiv Rajagopal from Hindus for Human Rights. So over to you, Raju. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Friends, I'm Rajiv Rajagopal, co-founder of Hindus for Human Rights, an advocacy organization dedicated to speaking up for democracy and multi-religious pluralism. As others have already covered the Prashant case, I want to reflect, if I may, on some of the recent judgments by the court as a lay person. When the court met for over 6 weeks in 2017 to deliberate on and rule that right to privacy is a fundamental right, everyone applauded it as a landmark judgment. But some saw it also as an urgent call to India to get its act together in legislating the right to privacy. Then came the Sabarimala judgment in 2018, which seemed to reinforce the notion that individual rights are more sacrosanct than so-called community sentiments. Many welcomed the court's ruling that women of all ages ought to be allowed into the hill shrine. But then the minority opinion by Justice Indu Malhotra in defense of tradition was so powerful that even one of the petitioning women reportedly had a change of heart. That case, in my view, was the court as it should be, offering varying shades of opinions from the learned judges so that citizens could make up their own minds on issues of faith. Then came the last two most visible years of the Assam NRC, ending in August 2019, which saw the court wear an executive hat as the overseer of the project. Unfortunately, we have all seen the disastrous results, which now poses an existential threat to over 200 million Muslims and other minorities. So it's only fair that people are asking, is it possible for this court now to be an impartial arbiter of petitions on the NRC? When the court deliberated long and hard on the right to privacy in the context of Aadhaar, did it not see the real elephant in the room, namely the NPR, which presents a far more imminent threat to people's privacy? Finally came the controversial Ayodhya judgment in November 2019 with no dissenting opinion. In my pedestrian view, that ruling was analogous to a court admitting that your home was indeed illegally destroyed, but instead of punishing the guilty, it unanimously hands over the land to the perpetrators while you still await justice. Is there any question why millions of ordinary citizens think that justice was neither done nor seen to be done? That judgment also disabused any notion that the court was moving away from legitimizing the fungible notion of community sentiment, in this case, of course, only that of the majority community. So in a nutshell, if some of us felt a sense of optimism by the progressive rulings of the court only a couple of years back, that optimism has in recent months melted away with a foreboding sense of pessimism. But it took someone like Prashant to give voice to that despair and to warn the nation about the ongoing destruction of our democracy. Or in my own words, the downhill journey of Lady Justice, with her balance increasingly tipping towards the executive and the majority community. The court's response this week to Prashant's call of conscience, sadly, has been to shoot the messenger. To quote Indira Jai Singh Ji, who is with us today, without a vibrant bar, there can be no vibrant judiciary. We lawyers are the primary victims of this judgment. Be quiet or face contempt is the message of the court. Hindus for Human Rights stands in solidarity with Prashant, a beacon for all those who are standing up for democracy, and we decry the contempt charges against him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Raju, for yet another brilliant statement for people to really process it. A lot of good information there. Next, we have on our schedule is Anil Wagner from Dr. Ambedkar International Center. So if I may have you on the floor, over to you.
Jai Bhim. We are from Ambedkar International Center, USA. We stand for protection of human rights of everyone and especially the downtrodden. While on one hand, we have pandemic like Corona, the government has started a battle against people and democracy. Anyone the government is not comfortable with is put into jail without bail. We have people famously called BK12, Dr. Anand Teltumde, Ms. Sudha Bhardwaj, Rona Wilson, Jammu and Kashmir leaders, Dr. Kafil Khan, IPS officer Sanjeev Bhatt, who are in jail on very flimsy grounds without any charge sheet being brought in. It is unfortunate that Prashant Bhushan, an eminent human rights lawyer and my hero, might be put in jail. Supreme Court has developed big ego and can't stand constructive suggestions. The appointments of judges is decided by the judges themselves. It is not representative of the people. Minorities, women, scheduled caste and tribes are not represented on this court. Is this the people's court? As Dr. Ambedkar said, it is up to the people who implement the constitution to make it great. Today, Supreme Court is not standing with the people when poor people were marching on foot to their homes when the entire country was shut down with no notice at all. We at Ambedkar International Mission stand for the human rights and condemn an attempt to silence people. We stand in solidarity with all the people who are in the jail and Prashant Bhushan. Jai Bhim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wagner, for brilliant statement on behalf of the Ambedkar International Center. We're really glad to have you as partners here. Next, we have up on our schedule is Rohan Rapati, who will be speaking on behalf of Young India. Rohit, are you around?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Over to you, Rohit.
Thank you. Friends, my name is Rohan Rapati, and I'm the founder of Young India, a policy advocacy group based out of the Washington metropolitan area. Young India is dedicated to the cause of furthering human dignity through nonviolence and leadership development. Beyond the specifics of Mr. Prashant Bhushan's case, I will focus my remarks on the socio-political precedents the court's decision might set. Our deeper concerns pertain to individual liberty, institutional accountability, and the moral incompatibility of legal norms such as contempt of court within freedom-loving democracies. First, in a Republic of India's stature, preserving individual liberty and freedom of expression must be the highest occupation of all institutions of the state. India's civilizational values of vad vivad, dialogue and debate are the ingredients that make its society truly exceptional. Freedom of the mind, spirit, and ideas is not only core to the Indian identity, but it is also the very thing that breathes India's much celebrated innovative spirit. Therefore, any intended or unintended attempts at restricting this liberty set a demoralizing and dangerous precedent for India's entrepreneurial youth that needs more freedoms, not fewer. The struggle for pushing the envelope on individual freedoms is a cause that India's youth must own and win. It should not let a generation that has already made a pact with its destiny define theirs. The second issue highlighted by this case is that of institutional accountability. Why should any public institution, as has been argued, be beyond any kind of scrutiny? The moral and, in fact, the functional case for such an argument is weak. Evidence backs our conviction that nations that value transparency and accountability inspire effective institutions that ultimately match the aspirations of its citizenry. We see no reason for India's democracy to abandon these ideals. Lastly, and most importantly, in a mature democracy like India's, legal norms such as contempt of court are simply outdated. To reiterate, placing any institution beyond the reach of the public eye can be reasonably viewed as undemocratic in the 21st century. The Republic is of, by, and for the people. It is the people who must have a final word on its performance and the freedom to express their assessment. Historically, the Supreme Court of India has played a crucial role in preserving India's constitutional democracy by guarding against executive and legislative overreach. In the process, it has, till recently, strengthened the case and the cause for individual liberty. As public's trust in that very capacity stands stressed, the court today has an opportunity to further distinguish itself by reconsidering its earlier conviction on Mr. Bhushan. Young India stands in solidarity with Mr. Bhushan. More importantly, as members of the Indian diaspora, we remain hopeful about the deliverance of justice from the esteemed court. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rohit from Young India, for a brilliant statement. Next up on the schedule is myself, so I will be taking over at this point. Myself, I'm Dr. Madan, Professor of Criminal Justice and founder for Global Indian Progressive Alliance, a grassroots organization headquartered in New Jersey. We stand for bringing people together towards building progressive communities and dedicated members represented by academicians, researchers, political and civic leaders, corporate leaders, grounded in scientific, evidence-based research, driven in the pursuits of facts, liberty, rationality, advocacy, and social justice. As progressive Indians, we believe fiercely in the rights of people to express themselves and in exercising their fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. To say that we are extremely disappointed by the contempt charges as a follow-up of initiating suo motu criminal contempt proceeding against lawyer activist Prashant Bhushan on mere tweets will be a gross understatement. On the very surface, it is devoid of due process and procedural fairness. India's constitution under under Article 19 expressly states, and I quote, all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. And with the nature of, and I unquote, and with the nature of contempt charges filed, it has opened up a debate on the fundamental rights enshrined for every citizen within India's constitution. We see this issue beyond an individual, but more considering the broader message it is likely to dissipate in muzzling people's right to express themselves, which should be a cornerstone of a sustained and progressive democracy. For a democracy to sustain, thrive, and flourish, the right to free speech must remain as one of the most sacred rights in the citizenry can and must have, and we must stand in solidarity unconditionally on that. Criticism allows us to introspect on our conduct both at an individual level and the institutional level excuse me, that we claim to represent. It can allow for new ideas, new value systems to emerge, whereby disagreements do not necessarily mean disrespect. And by no stretch of imagination, they bring disrepute to the institutions that have withstood time and again for far too long and for far bigger than a few individuals who are the current custodians. Similar to America's fundamental values, dissent in India needs to be considered as Indian tradition. And clearly, we do not hold in contempt of following a major part of who we are, which Amartya Sen may even identify us as argumentative Indian. Should this contempt charge be upheld, we remain concerned of the judgment to becoming a classic case study on free speech and the intersection of current political environment in many courses on jurisprudence. Asking the question, where is the fine line of upholding constitutional guarantees? Even if we were to consider Prashant Bhushan's tweets as criticism by a hypothetical stretch, we have a precedent in P.N. Duda versus P. Shivashankar, whereby the court observed, and I quote, fair criticism of the conduct of the judge, the institution of the judiciary, and the functioning may not amount to contempt if it is made in good faith and in public interest, and I unquote. We are concerned about this judgment as a landmark judgment that is likely to shake the foundation of fundamental principles ascribed to citizens and bringing questions of trust and respect between judiciary and the citizenry. In the times marked by troubled socio-political history of our contemporary times, shift into majoritarianism, and question on the separation of powers, we still view Supreme Court of India as a beacon of hope that will stand for upholding the constitutional guarantees and show large-heartedness in viewing the disagreement as not disrespect, not viewing criticism as an affront to its powers. With over 3.5 crore cases pending over courts across courts in India, we request the Supreme Court to take suo motu in addressing those pending cases, perhaps, that may be impacting many ordinary citizens. As progressives, we want to look at the brighter future ahead. We look for a reform to the criminal justice system and suggest that perhaps the court take yet another suo motu cognizance on the vagueness of Section 2C of the Contempt of Court Act of 1971 that gives broad latitude to understanding what is scandalizing or what can tend to scandalize or lower the authority of any court, or that interferes or tends to interfere with the administration of justice in a court. Perhaps instead of admonishing an individual tweets, we need to shift the narrative in examining the said act so it cannot be applied in a way that jeopardizes the constitutional guarantees provided to the citizens otherwise. As Progressive Alliance, we also position ourselves in the historic phrase attributed to Voltaire, and I quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," and I unquote. In closing, as Global Indian Progressive Alliance, we expressly state our solidarity with Prashant Bhushan and hope that the Supreme Court will reconsider withdrawing the contempt charges against him. Thank you very much. So at this point, we will be transitioning to the call for action on International Day for Solidarity with fasting for Prashant Bhushan and prayer for Supreme Court, led by our young champion, Ms. Suniti Sanghavi. Like all of us, many of us, she also bleeds blue. She is a scientist by profession and is currently in Los Angeles. Her initiative revolves around using the power of fasting in bringing people to common goals of peace and solidarity. The fasting chain that began at the onset of Delhi pogrom early this year is now on to its 177th day, with having engaged more than 24 fasters from across the globe. And we are very proud of her. The aim of fasting is to develop empathy for the suffering of others, to give an expression to our frustration and dissatisfaction with the state of our nation, to grow an inclusive community based on love, empathy, and trust. With that as a background, I would like to invite Suniti to lead the call at this point. Over to you, Suniti. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manish. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So today I will start with a couplet from the Upanishads that seems as universally relevant today as ever. Asatoma sadgamaya. When surrounded by lies and deception, let us be led towards the truth. Tamasoma jyotirgamaya. Amid the darkness of ignorance and despair, let us be led towards enlightenment and hope. Mrityoma amrit gamaya. When surrounded by short-term distractions, trials, and temptations, let us be anchored by the true meaning of life. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Let there be peace, and let us live in harmony with each other and the natural world around us. This simple Shanti mantra from the Upanishads touches us all, regardless of whether we are young or old, rich or poor, Indian or not, Hindu or not, believer or atheist like me, a Dalit, a tribal, a member of our many religious minorities. It is universal because it appeals to our shared humanity. A related idea that finds universal appeal is, regardless of one's origin or station in life, is representative democracy, in which the government represents and works for the well-being of each and every citizen. How would our elected representatives know if their actions on our behalf are actually doing us any good? There's a very efficient way. It is our critical feedback, communicated through our elected representatives amplified by the media, and protected by our judiciary until appropriate policies are executed by the powers that be. Unfortunately, our public servants today have forgotten who they really serve, causing an unprecedented erosion of the traditional four pillars of the Indian democracy. The only remaining pillar on which our democracy teeters today is the voice of the common man and woman, which were manifested and are still in nationwide protests against the discriminatory and oppressive policies of our government. These have been met with ruthless suppression as witnessed by the illegal detention of public intellectuals, protesters, and students, to say nothing of the regular impunity with which rapes, lynchings, and violent attacks are being carried out on the most vulnerable sections of our society. It is not difficult to recognize that we are spiraling ever faster towards asatya, tamas, and mrityu, untruth, darkness, and destruction. The only means we have to put a check on this dangerous trend is to speak up, to infuse the current political climate with some desperately needed satya, jyoti, and amrit, truth, light, and the essence of what it means to be truly alive. Supreme Court lawyer Prashant Bhushan has been a tireless champion of the constitutional rights of the people of India and a long-standing defender of the integrity of our judiciary as envisioned by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. By slapping contempt of court charges on him for legitimate tweets questioning the conduct of the Chief Justice of India in the midst of our runaway COVID crisis, the Indian judiciary has cleared any remaining doubts about its collusion to stifle people's freedoms. We, the people, can resist this with the gentle power of truth, empathy, and love, because no one can ever take those away from us. On February the 25th, I struggled to make sense of the communal violence unfolding back home in India, in Northeast Delhi. This, with the support of an extraordinary group of friends, gave birth to a chain fasting protest that has now clocked over 175 consecutive days and grown to include 28 fasters and hundreds of well-wishers all over the world. The rules of chain fasting are simple but demanding. Fasters go without food for 5 days straight, consuming only water and some honey in order to remain functional as we go about our day-to-day activities. Every day of the fast, we post a message of protest on social media, drawing attention to issues of the faster's choice. Spreading the message of peace, fighting fascism, and demanding accountability from our elected leaders remain the primary unifying focus of our protest. Presently, when the privilege enjoyed by anyone with an internet connection stands in glaring contrast against the living conditions of the vast majority of victims of state-sanctioned violence in India, the sheer discomfort of fasting allows us to get at least some of our own skin in the game. And yet, it is eye-opening to realize how our privilege continues to protect us. Our self-inflicted pain is merely temporary. The first 2 days are internal struggles against the body, rumbly bellies and hunger pangs, and the mind which is constantly thinking of food by trying not to. The third day usually offers respite as our bodies finally make peace with us and we realize how much mental space we have at our disposal that was previously only preoccupied with thoughts of food. Days 4 and 5 are almost meditative. The reduced urge to eat, combined with lower energy levels, make us more deliberate in our thoughts and actions, often providing the peace and focus to notice inner voids that we otherwise continually bury under our insatiable appetites. By the end of the fast, many volunteers say they feel happy, rejuvenated, and somehow reconnected with nature. I call on you, every one of you, to join us in large numbers and observe a one-day fast on August the 22nd. This is a day we will dedicate to Prashant Bhushan in solidarity with his struggle to preserve the sanctity of public opinion in India. Let us all seize this moment to play an instrumental role in the triumph of love and compassion over the blind and hateful destruction that we have had to witness over the past 6 years. Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Suniti, for a brilliant lowdown on your initiative. And we hope that by the end of this call, we will have many people sign up. Did you want to tell people how they can reach you briefly?
So, Manish, in this case, would it be possible for me to share links? We have a sign up link over a tiny URL that I will try to disseminate over Facebook and through Manish, through this press conference and all the proceedings.
Sure. Right. So why don't you add those links in the chat window, so at least people who are on the call and we have fairly good numbers, so they can at least have it handy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds
All right. Excellent. Excellent. I think so. We are pretty much good on time. So that brings us to the second last component of our day today, which is the Q&A. And I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Ms. Sunita Vishwanathan from Hindus for Human Rights. So Sunita, over to you for taking the questions and I guess speaking them on behalf of the poser, and then the group will answer that, or whoever is asked to answer.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm Sunita Vishwanath. I'm a co-founder of Hindus for Human Rights, and I'm really honored to be with everybody and so inspired by everything we've heard this morning. And I will be fasting with you, Suniti, on August 22nd.
You're welcome. That'd be fantastic.
I want to first, before we go to the questions, I want to recognize somebody very special in the audience, and I will unmute Mr. Hiremath, who founded one of the earliest India-oriented NGOs in Chicago, fought the emergency, and recently exposed the massive mining scandal in Karnataka with the help of Prashant ji. He will be speaking from a village, which is also standing, the whole village is standing today in solidarity with Prashant ji. So I'm going to see if I can unmute Hiremath ji and ask you to share your thoughts with us. Can you speak?
I think the host has to unmute.
Yeah, I think he can do it actually. It's mute on his side.
I hope he can.
Yeah, if it's possible for the host to unmute him, it'll be better because. And his name appears as Sangaya or Hiremath.
Yeah, now it's here. Yeah.
Oh, he went. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mr. Hiremath?
Well, Mr. Hiremath, you can speak now.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Just an FYI, as we are getting him on board, if there are questions and questions from the press on the call or other participants, please post it on Q&A and we will take those questions.
Raju, if you have a way to call Mr. Hiremath, we can have him join, but I'll start the questions.
Yes.
So we have a question from Mr. Gauss and Mike Gauss, our colleague. He says, is there an appeal being made? What action should we take?
Sunita, is that a question addressed to a specific individual?
It's not. Anybody who's close to the case can or knows about this can answer. The question is, can we make an appeal? And also, what can we all do? Raju?
Yeah, I think Suniti has already outlined one of the most immediate action items, which is to join on 22nd as a day of International Day of Solidarity, where we fast for Prashant and pray for the Supreme Court. That's only the immediate action. And we also have a change.org petition going around that all the participants will receive an email with some of these links, since if we are not able to post them today, including some of the action that are happening internationally. For example, UK and other places, there are a lot of action going on. So using that information, hopefully each of you will find your own way to get engaged.
Thanks, Raju. Indiraji, do you have any information for all of us about the legal process?
But can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Prashant himself has already announced, and I have confirmed it with him, that he intends to file a review petition. He will be going to court with a prepared statement, which says that if the court insists on punishing him, either by way of imprisonment or fine, he will ask for a suspension of that sentence or that fine.
Mr. Hiremath, we tried to get you online. Did you try?
Sorry, Raju, will you mute yourself?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can I keep you on speakerphone so that everybody can hear?
Yeah. So Prashant has already announced his strategy. He is going to go in for a review. And to answer the question very directly, there is no appeal, but there is a review. And after review, there is a possibility of what we call a curative petition to prevent miscarriage of justice. So we haven't seen the end of this case.
Thank you, Indiraji. I'm going to move on. Raju, is Mr. Hiremath ready? You're muted.
Yeah. Try to get him on again if he's able to do.
He's actually in the panelist list. Actually, he's there.
Okay.
So Hiremathji, would you like to speak to us?
Certainly. Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for a wonderful Indian American press conference today, and more particularly for the 22nd International Day of Solidarity with Prashant Bhushan. I have known Prashant Bhushan for well over 2 decades, and I've worked him closely with the millions of people who have been affected by environmental issues, by social justice issues, human rights. He has been truly a tower of strength for us working in the field. And as you very correctly mentioned, recently, this reckless and irresponsible illegal mining in the districts of Bellary, Chitradurga, and Tumkur in Karnataka, he led our defense in the Supreme Court. And we're not only able to suspend the illegal mining, but send the entire gamut of highly influential, including the Minister Gali Janardhan Reddy, who was like kingpin of the mining mafia, along with other politicians, senior officials, who all collaborated with him in this great assault on nature, to jail. And now for the mining affected people, which is our major concern, and restoration of environment, which is very central to it, Supreme Court has set aside 15,000 crores for the human development of the mining affected people, that is health, education of their children and their livelihood, and also for the restoration of environment. He has been truly a tireless crusader for the causes of environment, human rights, and corruption, especially against the corruption in the high places. And we also worked with him in the Bastar region of what is now Chhattisgarh state. And for lakhs of tribals who were very much adversely affected by the timber mafia there, we were able to get a 3-year ban on felling of trees, thereby not only protecting the environment, but empowering the tribal people to work for justice and to work for peaceful living, which was very badly affected by unscrupulous combination of politicians, timber mafia, and also officials. And Prashant, more than anything else, he has been a wonderful human being. who has been our partner and indeed a great source of strength for what we are doing at the grassroots level. And as you know, he has made our democratic organs like the judiciary, the executive, and the various democratic institutions accountable. I also had the privilege of working with him for the Committee for Judicial Accountability and Reforms. And this is one of the things we are saying. And I am also now National President of Citizens for Democracy. We basically passed a major resolution saying that the Supreme Court must recall the verdict against Prashant Bhushan because it is an assault on the freedom of speech. And we have very, we have stated that holding Prashant Bhushan guilty and awarding him any punishment are not going to do any service to the administration of justice or enhance the majesty of law. The tweets made by Prashant Bhushan were expression of anguish felt by thousands of victimized citizens who are at the receiving end of the brutal state power and who cry and hope for judicial protection. The people look upon the Supreme Court as citadel of justice and bulwark of democracy. And we urge the Supreme Court to recall this most unjust order. And as one of the youngsters very eloquently stated, it is a miscarriage of justice. And Supreme Court is the one which is on trial, not on Prashant Bhushan, as Professor Rajiv Gandhi said. And Prashant Bhushan is indeed one of the great Indians of our times. And it has been a great privilege to work with him. He's a role model for most of the youngsters in the country. And I thank you for this wonderful opportunity, a very thoughtful, very well thought out program that you have planned. And I would like to also join you on the 22nd International Day of Solidarity, that fast with Prashant, and pray for the Supreme Court, that the wisdom will prevail and that they will recall this order, stop the further hearings on the 2009 case, and truly stand for justice as all our countrymen expect it to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hiramath, especially for all the work you are also doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will go back to the question and answers. Yes. Is that okay, Manish? Okay.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Sure. There's a question from Muhammad Riaz. He asks why international pressure is not put upon the establishment from the United Nations, anybody to release all the political prisoners and forced prison terms. And he's asking if all of our organizations and all the advocates can take some action in that direction. And anybody can answer the question who wants to. The question's about international pressure.
So I can speak from our progressives perspective. We respect, we respect thoroughly India's republic nature of a country, which means that they have the laws, they have the system, and we want to hold their feet to the fire of having the people within the country do the right thing. What we're doing through these conversations, creating those awareness, and it's not to obviously bring the international community into it, but creating that awareness so people within the system wake up, and do the right thing. So that's where our position in that aspect is. We don't know at this point if there is international pressure even will work, given the republic nature of a country. No country would want to interfere in the internal mechanisms of the country so as to speak of. So there is this legal limitations from what I understand. And that's where I think my position would be, but happy to have obviously other panelists answer that as well.
Yeah, if I may state.
Go ahead, Raju.
Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Please, Raju. Please go ahead, Raju.
Yeah, Hindus for Human Rights, as being citizens of both the countries, feel that we must also make use of the tools available to us in the United States through our representatives who speak up for democracy here, and some of them are not even aware of what's happening in India. So we have been pushing working with the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. We've been working with the United Nations to raise awareness to what is going on and to educate our Congress people to take a stand on what is happening, and also telling them that silence is not an option. Silence, especially when they are talking about kicking out Trump and preserving American democracy, if some of them are refusing to even acknowledge what is happening to Indian democracy, we feel they are being silent, in silent collusion with the Indian government. So these are the efforts we are doing, and hopefully you will see some of them on our website, if not now, as we move forward with that. Thank you.
Geeta, can I piggyback on that question for a quick? I have a question follow-up for Indiraji along those lines. So
Sure.
Indiraji, the question is, how does the Indian legal fraternity view the role of their international peers in this situation like this? What kind of intervention or support do you expect or would be welcome?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead. As Manish rightly pointed out, under international law, apart from anything else, there is this doctrine of exhaustion of domestic remedies. As I said, in Prashant's case, remedies have not yet been exhausted. There is the power of review. There is also the power of filing curative petitions, which are intended to prevent the miscarriage of justice. So in this specific case, I have no doubt in my mind that the entire process, it cannot be called an appellate process, but it is a curative process, will be gone through. As an immediate international legal response, it will have to wait till our domestic remedies are exhausted. But the building up of public international opinion cannot and need not wait, and it has its own dynamic. Insofar as other political prisoners are concerned, there was a question about political prisoners. Complaints have been received from the special rapporteurs, and this is one thing that perhaps you could do. You could write to the special rapporteur for freedom of speech and expression and complain that this judgment already has a chilling effect on the right to free speech, and that a complaint should be lodged with the Indian government, not with the Indian Supreme Court, but with the Indian government. So there is a whole host of support activity that can be organized.
Thank you, Indiraji. I'm going to do a time check. We have to wrap up in around 5 minutes.
Sunita, if I can quickly just make one quick follow-up comment to Indiraji's.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think one thing is that Bar Association of India has already come out in support of Prashant Bhushan, so you can already see that even within the judiciary there are diversion of views, and that's one point for our other members to know. The second, Indiraji, we would like to work with you on this particular topic of reaching out to rapporteurs, so maybe we can connect offline to pursue that as a group with you and take your legal counsel on that. Thank you. Over to you.
So there are a few questions. I don't think we can get to all of them. There's one from Rohit on the panel, and it's for Rajmohanji. And the question is, what would Bapuji do?
So those who are not aware of this will be interested to know that the first great nationwide movement under Gandhi's leadership took place in 1919. The movement that led to the tragedy of the Jallianwala massacre, because there was such a great movement and then the British government tried to suppress it. That movement in April 1919, the first great national movement, was for freedom of speech, was against the Rowlatt Act, which sought to end freedom of speech or curb freedom of speech. So Bapu would be totally and completely with us today in the battle to get the Supreme Court of India to back away, to move beyond, and to accept that there has been a miscarriage of justice, this crucial freedom of speech issue.
Thank you, Rajmohanji. And for a final question, let me ask Dr. George Petteri he asks, what is the justice involved in picking up Prashant when more urgent cases of communal riots, CAA, and Jammu and Kashmir situation are pending before the Supreme Court of Justice? Maybe Indiraji or any of you who want.
Well, I think the whole world has commented on this, including a former Chief Justice who said the heavens would not have fallen if this case was not taken up. But I have gone on record to say, as a feminist, I say the personal is political and the political is personal. So one has to really analyze this judgment from more points of view than just one. I'll leave it at that. But for Rajmohan, I would add that, tell me, wouldn't Bapu have just accepted the punishment and said, yes, I will continue to speak and I'm ready to go to jail for what I have said?
Rajmohan ji, do you have anything to say?
He may have said that, Indiraji, but he was also very unpredictable. So we should not assume what he said.
Okay. Okay.
So as a final question, I'll squeeze in. There's an anonymous attendee. Also, Javad Bhai, if you can mute all the non-speakers, it would be great. An anonymous attendee says this, and it's a question actually for Indiraji. Besides a few exceptions, India's legal community is largely complicit in enabling the arbitrary and authoritarian actions of this government of the last 6 years. Why is that? What do you think needs to change in the Indian legal profession so that we reclaim the constitutional values we have sworn to uphold?
Thank you for that question. It's a very, very important one. But it's to do with what Rajmohan said in his opening comments. We are seeing ethno-nationality. We are seeing anti-democratic pushbacks on individual rights. So it did amaze me to begin with when I saw the polarization of Indian society enter the courtroom. But I've seen it. And at first it shocked me until I understood that it's just a mirror image of what's going on outside the court. You just have to watch some of our television channels to see the kind of polarized non-debates that take place. You are pushed into a situation where you must take a stand for or against. It's the same mentality. If you're not with me, you're against me. And no one has any time for nuanced debates. No one has any time to consider the heart of the matter. And this is what has happened to the Indian legal profession. So I cannot offer you a solution to the problems of the Indian legal profession. Dehors a solution to the return of civilized debate to Indian political discourse.
Thank you, Indiraji. I am going to hand back over to Manish. I think we're out of time for Q&A. And again, I just want to say that the links to the fasting Day of Solidarity on August 22nd, Suniti ji has shared with all of us. And so I hope many of you will join in the August 22nd action. Thank you. Manish, you want to take it over?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sunita, for your notes, and Indiraji and Rajmohan ji for answering all the questions, and other panelists. At this point, if I may request our panelists to put in the chat window about their Facebook page or Twitter page that they think that people would like to follow, so they can release their individual group statements on those channels as well. So that's something that I would encourage you to post your links in the chat window while we are on. The next, I will transition to my notes of thanks here. So a few notes of thanks, obviously one to begin with, to the brilliant team to have come together in reclaiming India back to its foundational values, as I said in my opening remarks. Our effort shows to the rest of the world that the left can be united with different lenses on the spectrum of faith, ideologies, and progressive ideals. I also want to thank wholeheartedly Indira Jaisingh ji and Dr. Gandhi for coming last minute on this important call and sharing their keynote and special remarks. I believe that the audience and myself included have felt probably more learned with your views and your reflections based on your lifetime of work in sharing with us. So thank you very much to both of you for joining us and giving us your precious time. I also would like to thank at this point Javed from IAMC for running this call. It wouldn't have been possible to run this show without his technical expertise. We were pretty much handheld by him and being here. So thank you very much, Javed, for your help and for all your assistance, including to the IAMC for letting us use your platform. Finally, our individual statements will be made available on our social media page, as I mentioned. And I just want to close this out on 2 points here. The strength of this press conference is in diversity of voices and perspectives from young and old alike, and some of those with midlife crises who I must keep anonymous. Our strength is in single point focus of shifting the narrative back to where it belongs, moving India forward as a truly secular, plural, democratic, and a progressive country that it deserves to be. And we thank you for joining in this journey. In solidarity with standing up for Prashant Bhushan and decrying the contempt charges against him, we hope that the Supreme Court will do the right thing at the end of the day. Thank you very much for joining. This makes it official closure of the call. Have a great day.